In this section, we're going to talk about what we call the sine and the cosine functions. Basically, the sine and the cosine functions are two types of trigonometric functions that we're going to talk about in this chapter. But just to start off, trigonometric functions are basically functions whose domain consists of a set of angles. And so when we were dealing with algebra, we just thought about functions who had elements of their domain that were real numbers. But now we're going to have functions whose domain consists of angles. All right. And so we're going to derive how this process works in this video. So let's talk about the definition of the sine and the cosine functions. I'm going to let alpha be a central angle on the unit circle in standard position, right? And so if it's a central angle, that means its center is going to be at the center, its vertex is going to be at the center of the circle. And if it's in standard position, that means its vertex is in the x-axis at the origin, and its initial side is on the x-axis. So this, if this were a perfect circle, that would be my vertex, and this is awful, but this will be my initial side. And that can be considered my terminal side. All right, key word here is unit circle. What we're going to do is we're going to use unit circle trigonometry, right? A unit circle has radius equal to 1. And so I know that this point right here on my unit circle is the point 1, 0, because it's on my x-axis. And this point right here is the point 0, 1. This point right here is the point -1, 0. And this point right here is the point 0, -1. Okay? What we're going to do is if we have an angle who's a central angle who is in standard position, and that unit circle is the circle in which that central angle is located, then the sine of that angle alpha is going to be the y-coordinate to the point of intersection. So for this angle alpha that I have here, this is my angle alpha. It intersects my unit circle at this point right here. Let's use a different color. At this point right here. And so whatever the coordinates are of that point on the unit circle where the terminal side intersects our unit circle, the y-coordinate is our sine and the x-coordinate is our cosine. Okay, that's going to be our definition of sine and cosine. And so what we're going to do is we're going to find the sine and cosine of each of these angles. I'm going to do parts A and C, and I'll leave B and D for you to do by yourself. Okay? In part A, basically I want to find out what sine of pi equals and what cosine of pi equals. Well, one way for us to do that, and we're going to get rid of that, is to draw that angle in our standard position. And pi is the same thing as 180 degrees, so it's terminal side. I'm sorry about this bad drawing. It's kind of hard to draw on this pad that I have. But this is pi units, okay? If this were a unit circle, so I'm going to draw me a unit circle here. The point of my unit circle where the terminal side intersects my unit circle will be the point -1, 0. And so since sine represents my y-coordinate, the sine of pi is 0. And since cosine represents my x-coordinate, the cosine of pi is -1. All right. Part C, and that's what I just erased. We're going to find the sine of -7 pi over 2 and the cosine of -7 pi over 2. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw me my angle in standard position, and I know that I'm going to use a central angle on the unit circle. I'm going to go ahead and draw my unit circle so I can be a little neater here. All right, so if my angle will have its terminal side here, it's negative 7 pi over 2 units, right? So when I'm dealing with these radians, or any angle that's pretty big, I like to start notating my axes, right? So for instance, this would be 0 radians. This would be a negative pi over 2 radians. This would be a negative 2 pi over 2 radians, which is negative pi. This would be a negative 3 pi over 2, negative 4 pi over 2, which is, and then I can keep going, negative 5 pi over 2, negative 6 pi over 2, and this equals negative 7 pi over 2, right? And so my angle will have its terminal side, so I went up all the way around one time, and I got all the way back over here. And so this angle will have its terminal side on my positive y-axis, and the point on my unit circle means the radius of that circle is 1 unit long, and so this point will be the point 0, 1, which means my sine would be 1, and my cosine at negative 7 pi over 2 would be 0. All right, this is part 1 of the video.